The jungle was quiet in the most terrifying way possible. Not peaceful, watchful. Every leaf, every shadow, every broken branch felt like an eye staring back at the wounded American soldier lying half-buried in mud and blood. His rifle was gone. His leg was shredded by shrapnel. His uniform was torn, soaked dark with pain and rain. And yet his eyes were still open, not with hope, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous, resolve. Because this was not the story of a man waiting to die. This was the story of a man who decided how he would die, and how many enemies would go with him. He had been fighting for days, hungry, exhausted, bleeding, cut off from his unit somewhere deep in the Pacific theater of World War II, and the battle had already chewed through his platoon like a machine, leaving bodies behind without names, without graves, without witnesses. Radio contact was gone. Reinforcements were a fantasy. Escape was impossible. And now, surrounded by Japanese soldiers who had finally tracked him down, the war had come down to one final moment, one final decision. Boots crunched through wet leaves as Japanese voices echoed through the jungle. They were close now. Very close. He could hear their breathing, their gear shifting, the soft metallic click of weapons being adjusted. They knew he was wounded. They knew he was alone. And they knew this would be easy. A loud voice rang out in broken English, sharp and confident, slicing through the jungle air like a blade. "American soldier! You are wounded. You cannot escape. Surrender now, or you die." For a moment, time seemed to slow. The American closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in calculation. He thought about home, about the streets he grew up on, about the people who would never know how this moment ended. He knew what surrender meant here. No mercy, no rules, no return. He had heard the stories, captured soldiers tortured, executed, used as warnings. This was not a choice between life and death. This was a choice between how the end would be written. He opened his eyes and looked down at what he had left. A pistol, heavy in his hand, cold, honest. He checked the chamber with trembling fingers, not from fear but from blood loss. 8 bullets. That was all. No rifle, no grenades, no backup plan. Just 8 chances to make a statement that would echo far beyond this jungle. The Japanese officer repeated the command, louder this time, irritation creeping into his voice. "Last warning! Surrender now!" The American dragged himself upright against a tree, pain exploding through his body like fire. Blood ran freely from his leg, pooling into the mud beneath him. He knew he couldn't run. He knew he couldn't win, but winning had stopped mattering. Meaning had not. With a voice weak but steady, he shouted back, words that would later be repeated in whispers, reports and half-forgotten memories. "Of the war, I'll surrender, if you bring me 8 bullets. For a split second, the jungle went silent. Even the insects seemed to pause. The Japanese soldiers looked at each other, confused. Some laughed. Others frowned. The officer stepped forward slightly, eyes narrowing. He thought he had misheard. "What did you say?" he demanded. The American smiled. Not a big smile, not a brave one, a tired smile. The kind only a man at the very edge could manage. "I already have 8, he said quietly. "I just want to make sure you bring enough men." What happened next was not madness. It was not suicide. It was defiance, pure, deliberate, and absolute. The American raised his pistol, aiming not wildly but carefully. He had fought too long, killed too many, survived too much to waste a single round. Each bullet would count. Each pull of the trigger would be a choice. Each second would be stolen from the enemy and paid for in blood. The first shot shattered the silence like thunder. A Japanese soldier dropped before he even understood what was happening. Chaos erupted instantly, shouts, gunfire, bodies diving for cover. But the wounded American didn't panic. He fired again, and again. Every shot was slow, controlled, deadly. The jungle that had hunted him now became his last ally, swallowing sound, hiding movement, turning confusion into terror. Japanese soldiers had been trained to fight fearlessly, but this was different. This was a man who had already accepted death, and men like that were dangerous beyond reason. They weren't fighting an enemy anymore. They were fighting a decision that had already been made. Bullets tore into the tree behind him. Bark exploded, dirt flew. Pain screamed through his body as a round grazed his shoulder. Still, he didn't stop. He adjusted his grip. He steadied his breathing. The pistol bucked again. Another soldier fell, then another. Each time, fewer voices shouted commands. Each time, the tone shifted. from confidence to urgency to something very close to fear. Blood loss was catching up with him now. His vision blurred at the edges. The jungle spun. His hands felt heavier with every second, but he kept count. He always kept count. 5 bullets gone, 3 left. He knew what each one was worth. He knew when to fire and when to wait. As Japanese soldiers tried to flank him, crawling through undergrowth, he listened. He remembered training drills. He remembered voices from long ago telling him, "When you're outnumbered, let them come to you." And they did. Too close, too confident, too sure he was finished. The 6th bullet found its mark. The scream cut short. The 7th followed almost immediately after, pure instinct, pure muscle memory. The jungle fell into a strange, broken quiet again. Smoke hung in the air. Bodies lay still among the leaves. And the American was still breathing. Only 1 bullet remained. His strength was nearly gone now. His head slumped back against the tree. The pistol felt impossibly heavy. The pain had become distant, replaced by a numb cold spreading through his chest. He knew the end was close. He also knew something else. He had changed this moment. What was supposed to be a simple capture had become a fight. What was supposed to be fear had become resistance. And what was supposed to be silence would become a story. Japanese soldiers stayed back now, unsure. They whispered. They waited. They had lost more men than expected. All to one wounded enemy who refused to kneel. The American opened his eyes one last time and looked at the pistol. 1 bullet, 1 final choice. And in that choice lay everything: honor, anger, courage, and the quiet understanding that some moments are bigger than survival. The jungle did not rush him anymore. That was the first thing he noticed. The shouts had faded, replaced by cautious whispers, and the distant shuffle of boots that no longer advanced with confidence. The Japanese soldiers had learned something important in the last few minutes. The wounded American was not finished, and approaching him blindly meant dying for nothing. The American could feel the pause like a held breath in the air. He used it. He forced himself to sit straighter, pressing his back hard against the tree, ignoring the wet warmth spreading beneath him. Blood loss had made his thoughts slow but not dull. Not yet. His pistol rested in his hand, the weight of the last bullet feeling heavier than all the others combined. He did not raise it. He did not threaten. He simply waited, listening. Leaves shifted to his left, slow, deliberate. Someone crawling. To his right, a twig snapped, followed by silence that was too careful to be natural. They were circling him now, trying to turn patience into a weapon. He smiled faintly, because patience was something he had already run out of. Pain surged through his leg in sharp waves, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he was still alive. Pain meant he still had time. A voice called out again, different now, lower, more controlled, no longer mocking. "American, you fight well. You have proven your courage. There is no shame in surrender." The words sounded rehearsed, almost respectful. The American knew what that meant. They wanted him alive now, not out of mercy, but curiosity. Men who refused to break interested them. Men who killed while dying unsettled them. That curiosity, he knew, could be turned into hesitation, and hesitation could be turned into opportunity. He did not answer immediately. Silence, when used correctly, was louder than any reply. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the sounds of the jungle sharpen, the wind, the insects returning cautiously. A faint metallic click, someone adjusting a rifle sling too close. His eyes opened again. "You already know the answer," he said, his voice rough but steady. "If you come closer, one more of you doesn't walk away." There was anger now. He could hear it. The officer barked something in Japanese, sharp and quick. Boots shifted again. A soldier broke cover suddenly, trying to rush him from the side, believing speed would succeed where caution failed. The American did not hesitate. The final bullet left the chamber in a flash of fire and sound, tearing through the humid air. The rushing figure collapsed forward, skidding through mud before going still. Silence fell harder this time. Not confusion, not chaos, finality. The American's pistol clicked empty in his hand. He lowered it slowly, his arm trembling uncontrollably now. That was it. No more rounds, no more tricks. He had reached the end of what steel and will could do together. His breathing became shallow, each breath scraping his chest like broken glass. His vision narrowed, dark creeping in from the edges, but he kept his head up. If this was the moment they came, he would meet it looking forward. Minutes passed, maybe seconds. Time had lost meaning. Then footsteps approached, not rushing, not circling. Straight on. A single figure emerged from the foliage, rifle lowered but ready. The Japanese officer stopped a few meters away, studying the American like a puzzle that refused to solve itself. Around him, soldiers held back, forming a loose semicircle, weapons aimed but fingers tense. They were no longer hunting. They were observing. "You are out of ammunition," the officer said calmly. It was not a question. The American nodded slightly. "That's right," he replied. "Now you can do what you came to do." The officer's eyes flicked briefly to the fallen bodies scattered through the jungle. His jaw tightened. "You should have surrendered earlier," he said. The American let out a weak, breathless laugh. "Then this wouldn't be much of a story, would it?" The officer stepped closer, close enough now that the American could see the fine lines of sweat and dirt on his face, close enough that a blade would have reached him if the American could still move his legs, but he could not. His strength was gone. He could feel it draining away with every heartbeat. Still, he met the officer's gaze without flinching. This was not bravado. This was acceptance. What happened next surprised everyone. The officer raised his hand, and the rifles lowered slightly. He studied the American again, this time not as an enemy, but as something else. A problem, a symbol. "You could have saved your life," the officer said quietly. The American shook his head. "No," he replied. "I could have delayed my death." "There's a difference." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The jungle breathed around them. Somewhere far away, artillery thundered faintly, a reminder that the war did not care about moments like this. Then the officer gave a short command. Two soldiers stepped forward carefully, weapons still trained, but their movements lacked urgency. They were cautious now, almost respectful. Hands grabbed the American's arms, not roughly, not gently, professionally. As they lifted him, pain exploded through his body, tearing a groan from his throat despite his effort to remain silent. His head slumped forward, darkness washing over him in heavy waves. He had fought the end as far as it could be fought. Now, whether he lived or died would no longer be decided by bullets as they carried him away. The American's thoughts drifted, not to fear, not to regret, but to a strange sense of calm. He had not begged. He had not broken. He had not gone quietly. Whatever happened next, that much could not be taken from him. Behind them, the jungle slowly reclaimed the battlefield. Blood soaked into the soil. Leaves settled back into place. The fallen lay still, unnamed, unremembered for now. But somewhere in the memory of the men who had faced him, the image of a wounded American asking for 8 bullets instead of mercy would remain. And that image would haunt them far, longer than gunfire ever could. Consciousness came and went in fragments, like waves breaking against a shore that refused to disappear. The American did not wake all at once. First came sound, the dull rhythm of footsteps, the scrape of boots against dirt, the low murmur of voices speaking a language that drifted in and out of meaning. Then came pain, deep and overwhelming, no longer sharp but crushing, as if his entire body had been placed under a single, relentless weight. When his eyes finally opened, the jungle was gone. Overhead, a rough canvas roof sagged between wooden poles. Swaying slightly with each movement of air, he was alive, for the moment. He lay on a stretcher inside a makeshift field camp, his leg crudely bandaged, dark stains already soaking through. The smell of antiseptic mixed with blood and damp earth, creating a stench that clung to the back of his throat. A Japanese medic worked silently nearby, hands moving with efficiency but no expression on his face. Guards stood at the edges of the tent, rifles slung but eyes fixed on him. No one spoke to him. No one needed to. Survival here did not mean safety, it meant postponement. The officer from the jungle entered the tent shortly after. He dismissed the medic with a brief gesture and sat on a wooden crate opposite the American, studying him again with that same unreadable expression. The American met his gaze, though keeping his eyes open now required effort. "You are fortunate," the officer said at last. "Another unit wanted you executed immediately." The American's lips twitched. "Fortune's a strange word," he murmured. "I seem to keep meeting it on bad days." Consciousness came and went in fragments, like waves breaking against a shore that refused to disappear. The American did not wake all at once. First came sound, the dull rhythm of footsteps, the scrape of boots against dirt, the low murmur of voices speaking a language that drifted in and out of meaning. Then came pain, deep and overwhelming, no longer sharp but crushing, as if his entire body had been placed under a single, relentless weight. When his eyes finally opened, the jungle was gone. Overhead, a rough canvas roof sagged between wooden poles. Swaying slightly with each movement of air, he was alive, for the moment. He lay on a stretcher inside a makeshift field camp, his leg crudely bandaged, dark stains already soaking through. The smell of antiseptic mixed with blood and damp earth, creating a stench that clung to the back of his throat. A Japanese medic worked silently nearby, hands moving with efficiency but no expression on his face. Guards stood at the edges of the tent, rifles slung but eyes fixed on him. No one spoke to him. No one needed to. Survival here did not mean safety, it meant postponement. The officer from the jungle entered the tent shortly after. He dismissed the medic with a brief gesture and sat on a wooden crate opposite the American, studying him again with that same unreadable expression. The American met his gaze, though keeping his eyes open now required effort. "You are fortunate," the officer said at last. "Another unit wanted you executed immediately." The American's lips twitched. "Fortune's a strange word," he murmured. "I seem to keep meeting it on bad days." The officer did not smile. "Men like you create unnecessary losses," he said. "You make others hesitate." The American breathed slowly, each inhale a conscious decision. "Then maybe," he replied, "you should stop teaching them that surrender is worse than death." The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. For a moment, the officer looked as if he might strike him. Instead, he stood. "You will be questioned," he said. "If you cooperate, you may live." The American closed his eyes briefly. "I've already decided how much I'm willing to give," he said softly. The interrogation did not begin with pain. It began with patience. Hours passed, then more. He was asked his name, his unit, his mission. He gave only what could be found on a dog tag. When pressed further, he remained silent. When threatened, he shrugged weakly. Pain returned later, methodical and controlled, designed not to kill but to wear down the will. Through it all, the American focused on something simple: breathing in, breathing out. Each breath was an act of resistance. What the interrogators never fully understood was that they were too late. The moment in the jungle had already taken everything he could lose. Fear had been spent there, among the trees and fallen bodies. What remained was stubborn, immovable, and useless to them. Information required hope, and hope for him was no longer tied to survival. Days blurred together. His wounds festered, then slowly began to close under harsh treatment. Food was scarce. Water tasted of rust and soil. He watched other prisoners come and go, some broken quickly, others disappearing without explanation. Through it all, the story traveled. He heard it in whispers from guards who thought he did not understand their language, in the way new sentries looked at him with something between caution and disbelief. The wounded American who had asked for 8 bullets had become more than a prisoner. He had become a warning. One evening, as the camp settled into uneasy quiet, the officer returned. He dismissed the guards and sat again across from him. "You know," the officer said slowly, "there are easier ways to die." The American looked at him through half-lidded eyes. "There are," he agreed. "But easy doesn't last long." The officer studied him for a long time. Then he spoke words the American did not expect. "If you had been born Japanese," he said, "you would have been honored." The American exhaled softly. "If I'd been born Japanese," he replied, "we wouldn't be having this conversation." The war shifted beyond the camp. Distant explosions grew closer over time. Aircraft engines began to appear overhead, first occasionally, then regularly. The balance was changing. One night, artillery thundered so close that the ground itself seemed to recoil. Orders were shouted. Equipment was moved. Tension replaced routine. The camp was preparing to relocate or abandon. On the morning it happened, chaos arrived without warning. Bombs fell beyond the perimeter, shaking the earth, tearing through trees. Guards ran. Shots rang out. In the confusion, a shell landed near the edge of the camp, throwing men and debris into the air. The American was thrown from his cot, pain flaring anew. But something else flared with it. Possibility smoke filled the camp. Screams cut through the noise. The officer shouted commands, trying to restore order. And in that disorder, fate shifted again. A fallen guard lay near the American, rifle just out of reach. He dragged himself forward inch by inch, fingers clawing through dirt and ash, pain screaming with every movement. His hand closed around the rifle's sling just as footsteps approached. A single shot rang out, then another. When the smoke began to clear, the camp was no longer what it had been. Some prisoners lay dead, others were gone. The Japanese unit had taken heavy losses, and the American, whether alive or dead, was nowhere to be seen. The jungle swallowed the truth once more. No one ever agreed on exactly how he made it out. War does that to stories. It fractures them, bends them, leaves behind only what survives retelling. Some said the American crawled into the jungle under cover of smoke, dragging a shattered leg through mud and fire until even pain gave up trying to stop him. Others believed a collapsing trench buried him alive and that he clawed his way back to the surface hours later, reborn from dirt and blood. A few swore they saw him, taken by local villagers who risked everything to hide a dying stranger from both sides. The truth, whatever it was, disappeared the moment the jungle closed behind him. What is certain is that days later, American forces swept through the region and found the camp abandoned, torn apart by bombing and retreat. They found bodies. They found shell craters. They found signs of prisoners, broken restraints, makeshift stretchers, blood trails that led nowhere. But they did not find him. Not at first. His name was listed as missing, then presumed dead. Then quietly something changed. Weeks later, a patrol discovered a man near a riverbank, more bone than flesh, delirious and barely breathing. His uniform was in tatters. His wounds were infected. But he was alive. When medics asked his name, he gave it in a whisper so faint they had to lean in to hear. When they asked how he survived, he said only one thing before losing consciousness again. I didn't. He spent months in hospitals, first in field tents, then aboard ships, then far from the jungle where the air no longer smelled like death. Surgeons saved his leg, though he would never walk the same again. Doctors said it was a miracle he lived. He never corrected them, because miracles suggest intervention and he knew better. What kept him alive was not luck or fate. It was refusal. When the war ended and he finally returned home, there were no parades waiting for him. No speeches. No medals pinned in front of cheering crowds. His story existed mostly in reports marked classified, in testimonies from men who struggled to put into words what they had seen, and in the quiet nightmares of those who had faced him and survived. He went back to ordinary life, carrying an extraordinary silence inside him. Years later, when someone finally asked him about that day, the moment the Japanese told him to surrender or die, he paused for a long time before answering. They thought they were offering me a choice, he said. But they didn't understand. The choice had already been made the second. I realized fear couldn't save me. He never spoke about the bullets, never counted the bodies, never claimed heroism. To him it was simple. He had reached a point where dignity mattered more than survival. And that is why this story matters. Because war is not remembered by numbers alone, not by maps or dates or casualty lists. It is remembered through moments, raw, human moments when someone stands at the edge of everything and decides who they will be, even if no one is there to witness it. A wounded American in a jungle, bleeding and alone, asking not for mercy, but for 8 bullets. Not because he wanted to die, but because he refused to disappear quietly. Some men surrender to save their lives, others fight to protect them, and a rare few do something else. Entirely, they fight to protect the meaning of their lives, even when survival is no longer guaranteed. Those men do not always get statues. They do not always get history books written about them. But they leave something behind that is far harder to erase. They leave a question. What would you choose when fear is no longer useful, and the only thing left to defend is who you are? That question still echoes through the jungle, through the war, through time, and it always will.